Oh yeah, we can close it. I mean, the outdoors, that's why the security guard's there, but you can close that door. We are.
Meet it in person.
It's nice. I mean, it's been nice having you on the Zoom call, but it's nice to be in person as well. Start slideshow, and then oops, forgot to do this. What's that? Oh, the thermostat will work, although I don't know whether it's going to make much of a dent before we leave. It's a little on the slow side, but it's worth a try. Clean out the flu, if nothing else.
Oh, even 60, it won't get beyond 69, I don't think. It's gonna be 57 now.
7 sounds nice.
It's more than a force, probably.
It is, at least according to my phone, it's about 40 degrees outside for the area. Well, I don't know the specifics of our thing. If you get in the hallway by the social hall, it becomes a nice little wind tunnel. So feels a little colder there. All right, but we are burning daylight, as they say, even though it's already night. So we are going to jump in. We're going to get to our trope as always, but I wanted to give a little bit more about the reading of the Book of Esther, because if you stop for a second, it's kind of weird. We understand why we read from the Torah, because the Torah tells us to study Torah. And even though the Torah itself only says we have to read it every sabbatical, meaning every 7 years, Ezra established that we would read it weekly so that the Torah would not be lost. Great, that makes a lot of sense. I think we're pretty clear on that. The Haftarah, it's a little bit of a harder sell. There's some history of people pairing up the texts to be complementary to the Torah reading, whether it was done during a time of crisis or not is a sort of a long-standing debate among scholars, but it makes a lot more sense. The Book of Esther, however, is kind of an in-between issue. Because we have other scrolls, like the Book of Lamentations, we have the Book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, we have Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, that get read at different holidays, but those do not come with blessings. They are not considered to be a mitzvah to read them in the technical sense of the mitzvah as a commandment. But the Book of Esther is, which is also why the Book of Esther is read from an actual scroll, a cloth, a properly made piece of parchment that has been written by someone properly trained, rather than for Kohelet, Shir HaShirim, or Eicha, Lamentations. We can read that from just a printout or a book. So Esther is kind of weird. So we have to figure out, why are we reading this book the way we read it? Why does it have a different level of importance and of strictures than the others? Remember, anytime we're saying Asher Kidishanu in a blessing, know that something here is more special than other customs that we have in Judaism. So the first reason of why we read Esther and why it has this importance is that it is the only post-Torah biblical holiday, and it has a canonical text. Well, you need both of those, right? Hanukkah is also post-biblical, post-Torah, right? Hanukkah came hundreds of years after the story of Esther, but there is no canonical text. That is to say, there is no text for the book of, for the Maccabees that is considered to be holy. There is the books of the Maccabees, but they are interesting to a Jewish scholarship, for Jewish scholarship, but they are not considered sacred texts. They are not considered to be part of the canon. And as such, we do not have a text to read for that for Hanukkah. That's one of the reasons why there isn't a special scroll read on Hanukkah. We can shoehorn some readings for the Torah and for the Haftarah that will be of similar theme, but nothing is right on the nose. So Hanukkah is out because it lacks that canonical text. There are other special events, such as the return of the exile, which you would think would be even more amazing than the story of Torah. We get to come back after the Babylonian captivity. Like, that should have been a day, but for that event and others, again, we lack specific dates or we lack specific texts that are considered canonical. And as such, while we read about them, we don't actually have a holiday set or a particular chanting that goes along with it. Makes sense, right? Still doesn't explain, however, why we read Esther, because, okay, fine, it is a post-Torah biblical holiday. It does say this was a special event, and it does have a text that's in the Bible, but why are we actually reading it? Because it told us to. That is to say, the book of Esther is extremely and quite unusually self-aware. Get that out of the way. The book of Esther actually is aware of the legacy that it is creating in a way that is different than other parts of Tanakh. Earlier parts of the Tanakh, King David, Solomon, etc., they're aware that they are on the stage of history, but they are not saying, and so we made a holiday and we're keeping it. It's just, this is what we're doing. Even the inauguration of the temple itself under Solomon wasn't considered to be, we're going to celebrate this every year. It was just one and done. But in the story of Esther, chapter 9, we see very explicitly that Mordecai records these events. He sends out the dispatches to all the Jews, and he charges them. He says, this is what we're going to do every year, 14th and 15th of Adar, we are going to have this holiday. It is the same day on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, and the same month which had been transformed for them from one of grieving and mourning to a festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, and as an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. The Jews accordingly assumed an obligation which they had begun to practice and which Mordecai prescribed for them. So we can go to a whole interesting tangent on halacha of how we assumed an obligation here as a mitzvah level commandment, even though it's not mentioned in the Torah. Short answer to that is when it has been prescribed by those appointed with Torah authority, then it becomes a Torah level commandment to follow what they have taught. But the most important part for tonight is to understand that they decided this was an important enough event that it needed to be perpetuated, and that there needed to be special forms of observance. One of those forms was sending gifts to each other. Another form was sending gifts to the poor. And the third was to have merrymaking. The having fun part is indeed part of the commandments of Purim. That's why we do all the fun stuff that we talked about last week during the reading, and why people will have parties and all sorts of other aspects. Good so far? Excellent. And then it goes on in chapter 9, a little ways later. They celebrate it for this reason, because of all that is narrated in this letter. Again, Megillah is self-aware in a completely different level than any other book in the Torah. Even the Torah itself does not call itself the Torah. The Megillah does. It understands that it is the document, that is the record of the story, that is commanding that this be carried out, and that it will be therefore part of that chain of tradition that will continue. Why they saw fit to act in such a way and what happened to them as a result. The Yehudim, first time, not at this point in the book, but the book of Esther was the first time that we see the word Yehudim, meaning Jews, in the entire Bible, accepted as binding for themselves, their progeny, and anyone linked with them, never to be changed, that they would observe these 2 days as written and at a proper time each year. These days shall be recalled and observed in every generation, every family, in every colony, in every city, and these Purim days shall never pass from among the Yehudim, nor their memory depart from their descendants. And of course, the way we prevent memory from disappearing is by repeating things, hence the chanting of the Megillah in its entirety. Okay, questions or comments on how the Megillah itself recognizes its own place in history and necessity of being perpetuated? Kind of clear, right? Yes.
It's in Nehemiah and Ezra, don't they talk about returning from?
They do. But they don't set up a holiday, and they don't set up any special commemorations for that moment. They get to work, and their books respectively talk a great deal about the labors that they went through to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the community, to put things back in order. But they never said, and let's make this a holiday so we keep remembering it. It was just the story of what they did. And it doesn't seem to have been written in with a mindset that this is going to form the nucleus of a memory about this event. Esther is quite frankly bizarre. It is the outlier throughout the entire Bible that seems conscious of what it's doing, rather than merely a record of what someone else did.
Did it occur before or after the return from the exile?
This took place after. That's why it is near the very end of the Tanakh, of the Bible, because it came after Ezra and Nehemiah had come back. We were already resettled in the land of Israel, but of course, not everybody went back. Mordecai, obviously, and Esther's family stayed in Persia, stayed in Shushan, in what is now modern-day Iran, and were doing okay. Mordecai was a government official. Not very high up, but he was, he had a nice government job. So yeah, it was well after the return. Okay, but there's another thing that I just, can't resist. Why are we reading Esther? Okay, we've got the reason why it's possible. We have a date, we have a canonical text. We've gotten the fact that the book itself tells us to perpetuate the memory. But what are we gaining from it? Like, why? Why read it anyway? What are we actually gaining from this process? Well, first, like I said, it is the first real diaspora story. The term Yehudim as a reference to all Jews, as no longer being this tribe or that tribe, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, but we're just Yehudim, taken from the name of the southern kingdom, Judah, but we're all the same, and everything that takes place is taking place outside of the land of Israel. This is the real diaspora story. Yes, we had all the stories that happened before the Exodus, what we're doing right now in the Torah readings with the book of Shemot. Obviously, the majority of the Torah takes place outside of the land of Israel, but we weren't quite a nation yet during much of that. And it really is only after the destruction of the first temple that we get what we now recognize as a diaspora community, a people who were bound together with a place, but weren't in that place. And the story of Esther is a story of how do you live like that? That's why, even though it's named Esther, that's not her actual name. Does anybody know what Esther's Hebrew name is? Hadassah, exactly right. It's why Hadassah, or the English translation Myrtle, is showing my age, was a very popular Jewish name for many, many years. That's why if you know certain generations of women, many of them are named Myrtle, because that is the English version of Hadassah, which is the Hebrew name of Esther. Esther is a Persian variant of her name. It's not based off the name Esther, Hadassah, it's probably based off the name Ishtar, which is its own interesting story because Ishtar was one of the ancient gods in that part of the world. So it would be the equivalent of naming your kid Muhammad or Christian. And, yes, there are, and I have met them, Jewish kids named Christian or Chris that didn't convert, that their families had given them that name. And that's basically what happened here with Esther. So it is a very relatable diaspora story because this is the kind of thing that we go through. And on that topic, it shows that God's participation in history is not always parting the sea. It's not always unleashing the plagues, that there is a place for God that is not the overt actor within the text, but instead is found through the actions of the main characters. Mordecai explicitly says, you know what? If you don't do anything, help will come from somewhere. He doesn't explicitly say God, which is why Esther is the great trivial pursuit question of which is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God by name. Book of Esther is your answer, but we still feel God's presence by the way people are inspired to do what they do throughout the story. And that's a very important, not just diaspora lesson, that is a very important growing up lesson for our nation. The shock of the destruction of the first temple was the first time that we sort of begun to see this big motions of history as being unfurling with God without miracles, but just with historical events. And once the prophets were gone, we now had to find the significance in these events and our response to those events in ways that were on our own shoulders. We didn't have a Jeremiah or an Ezekiel to come and tell us what to do. We had to navigate this, and that meant putting into practice what the Torah had taught us, putting into practice what our sages had taught us, what the rest of the Tanakh had taught us, And that is maturity, which is why, point 3, it completes the holiday cycle that begins at Pesach. Pesach is the first holiday, not Rosh Hashanah. That's only the beginning of the year. It's not the beginning of the holiday cycle. Pesach is the first holiday. The Torah makes that explicit multiple times. And by extension, that makes Purim the last major holiday, not Rosh Chodesh or Shabbat, of course, but as a holiday. Purim is at the end. And they really do fit beautifully as bookends to our maturity, that we started off needing a lot of handholding. We needed to be pulled out of the land of Egypt, often kicking and screaming. And we needed that guidance. We needed the flashy miracles. We needed all of that. We needed manna in the desert and a well that followed us. I mean, it was like total nanny existence there. And Purim is the exact opposite. Purim, I've given you everything I can give you. I've shown you everything I can show you. I've taught you everything I can teach you. And you have your inheritance. Go forth into the world and live like I have taught you. And Purim shows us stepping up and doing that and actually doing a good job of dealing with the crises that's facing our people. And that is the way God wants us to live. Right? God didn't take us out of Egypt to be his perpetual infants. He took us out of Egypt so that we could walk into the world and see what needed doing, and then know what needed to be done, and then do it. And the book of Esther tells us that in a beautiful way that really is not paralleled in any other part of Tanakh. All right, questions or comments before we roll up our sleeves and get down to work? All right, I'm going to actually unbutton a little bit because the heater is on, and I am dressed for the outside, not the inside. There we go. Okay. Now we can get down to it. All right. So just like for our Torah reading, we got to go over. Sorry, just making sure there's the other people there. We got to go over our big rules. We're going to go them chick-chock. Every word has a trope symbol. You don't see it? Look again. Every symbol is either a joiner or a stopper in the flow. It's either linking two words or it's making sure you put a break between two words. The symbol will always appear with the accented syllable, whether it's above or below, it'll be there telling you where to put the emphasis in a particular word. The other syllables are chanted in that neutral note. Just keep hitting the same key on the piano or vocal cords. Most Hebrew words, we don't have to look too hard to find that accented note. It's usually the final syllable. If it isn't, just save an extra note from whatever the trope melody block that you're doing and just paste it onto that final syllable or two occasionally, and you'll be fine. Okay. Other things we should always remember, the trope usually comes in family blocks. That makes it easy to remember. It also makes it easy to predict. And that means that there's less panic of what's coming next. The symbols always appear in that consistent pattern, the little pattern of the people in the car that I use. And if you learn the pattern, you can predict what trope is next. The melody, a motif of a given trope doesn't change, with a few exceptions, most notably our good friend Munach, who changes depending upon who he's with. But even when he changes consistently and predictably. Yes, you can lament, if only our ancestors had come up with a few more symbols, we wouldn't have needed to have only one symbol for a bunch of different melodies. But like we talked about last week, he's doing the same grammar job every place, so having the same symbol does really probably make sense. And I'm not going to question people that came up with a system that's still being used for 1,000 years later. They got something right, and I don't think I could match what they did. Okay, question or comment? Okay, so just a little bit of fine-tuning, things that I wanted to keep mentioning because these come up quite commonly when I'm working with people on their chanting, whether it be Torah, Haftarah, or one of the Megillot. Sometimes the way it looks on the page isn't the way it actually sounds. Most of the time, Hebrew is blessedly phonetic, meaning that a letter and a vowel will always sound the same, no matter what else is happening there. Unlike English, where trying to read English phonetically is an exercise in futility, you have to know the word. It's why learning to read English as a child is a nightmare because, sure, cat is the easy one, but apple, right? Really, why do we say apple? right? Shouldn't there be a vowel between the P and the L, not after the L? And yet, that's the one we give people to try and learn. But Hebrew is blessedly phonetic, but occasionally makes a few accommodations for human physiology. And that's the example we have right here. So if I was going to read this, and this is wrong, if I was going to read this strictly phonetically, I would say hich bad ti. But that's wrong, because what happens is the Daled and the Tav are both being made in the same place in the mouth. And that means if I say it smoothly, without putting a giant pause between every syllable, I would end up saying something like hichbadti. And I wouldn't break the Daled into its proper sound before I transitioned into the Tav for the T at the end. So what ends up happening is you say hichbadati, hichbadati. And there's this little bounce that happens when you're shifting between the Daled and the Tav so that the listener can hear and say, oh, that was a Daled and a Tav. That wasn't just one long Daled or one long Tav. There was a break there. Occasionally we have to do that. And you'll normally be able to almost intuit it because it is a physiological issue. It's just the way the tongue and the palate and teeth and throat and all of that work together. You working this out? You look like you were about to ask a question.
That word again.
So correctly, it should be hichbadati, hichbadati. But if I was doing it strictly phonetically, I would say hichbadti, hichbadti,
Doing the, making it hichbadati.
hichbadati, hichbadati. D. I'm saying more of a d, and there really shouldn't be much of a behind that Daled.
You're doing stuff.
Hich, hich.
We'll be saying the first syllable is different. The first syllable on this one, we're saying the way we expect to.
Right.
With the schwa being completely silent.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying badati. It's just he. And the Dalet should be the same. It should just be bad. But if I say bad t, then I lose the last half of the Dalet. So I've got to make it sharp, and that makes it I have to accentuate it.
We call it a double dot underneath the dog.
The shva. Yeah. Which have their own complicated rules because there's a shva na and a shva nach. Again, technically, there are two versions of them. Sometimes you hear them, sometimes you don't. The general rule is that if it's at the start of a syllable, you're going to hear it. And if it's at the end of the syllable, you won't. There are exceptions, of course, because, hey, languages are languages. But that is the general rule. And both of these are finishing off syllables. So we wouldn't expect to normally hear them vocalized. But because the Dalet and the T physically are very similar, we have to make them stand apart. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier in our review, we are lucky because we can start making predictions in the trope system. That is to say, if we start one trope, we can guess what the next one is going to be. Now, obviously, you shouldn't be guessing when you're up at the bima, but knowing what is likely to come, first of all, makes it easier to learn when you're at home and you're practicing. And second of all, it makes you feel more confident as you're reading because the next one sounds right. It sounds like something that should be there. And therefore, not only is it easier to remember, it's easier to feel good about what you're saying. And feeling good about what you're saying makes you feel more confident, which makes you less nervous, which makes everything work better. We've only got so much CPU up here. And the more we worry, the less we have processor power for doing other things. So the less we worry, because we can predict carefully, the less we're taking away from the brain doing the rest of its job. So if we look at line A, and we have our mercha there, what would be the most likely follow-up to that mercha? Right? Would it be 1, 2, or 3 as the most likely follower? And again, as I mentioned, there are curveballs. Sometimes the trope is weird because of the weird syntax and sentence diagramming you need to do. But in general, 1, 2, or 3 is going to almost always come after that mercha. Any takers on this? Or you just want to mentally chalk it up and then I'll tell you the answer. I'm not asking you to remember the name. You can just say column 1, column 2, or column 3. You've got an answer? Okay.
The next one would probably be number 3.
Exactly. The tipcha is the most likely follower after. So if we were in our Megillah trope, it would be mercha tipcha, which is the A over there, and then number 3. Mercha tipcha, because the munach and etnachta would normally come after a tipcha. They don't normally come after the mercha. So once you begin your mercha, you've got a 90% confidence rating of what's likely to come next. It's probably going to be that tipcha. Let's try row B. So row B is meant to be my mapach. Row C is meant to be my yativ, which we talked about last week. So row B is a mapach, mapaha. What's likely to come next in the Megillah, well, in any trope system, because remember, the grammar doesn't change, even though the melodies do. Pashta, which is number 1, exactly. Mapahach pashta, munach katon, right, which is munach katon. Obviously, they're in the wrong spot, because I was trying to mix it up. Row C, yativ, is almost always of those options going to be followed by the munach, because it's usually yativ, munach, katon. It could be a katon instead, but of those options, yativ is going to be followed by that munach. Daled is the azla, which we also did a little bit last week. Kadma ve'azla. And this is a little trickier because it doesn't always get followed by anything. It can sometimes go straight into a whole nother trope family. But if we're in a block, it's going to be followed by number 1, by revi'i. Revi'i, the little chuckling sound for Purim. And then E is our tipcha. Again, there's a couple things it could be followed by, but of those options, it's a little small. We're looking at our sof pasuk. We're looking at the end of a verse. Tipcha, sof pasuk. There's only so many places you can go after a tipcha and sof pasuk. Nachta, or the munach in between, is pretty much it. But knowing that there's only 3 or 4 options after any given trope cuts down the field of confusion greatly. So when it comes out, you'll recognize it, and if you say the wrong one, you'll immediately know it and go back to correct it. All right, so that's just a little exercise, but that's not what we're here for. We're here today. Let's go and put it there. We're going to do our review of what we did the first week, last week, and then get some new stuff under our belt. So, mercha tipcha, munach et nachta, mercha tipcha, mercha sof pasuk, kadma mapach pashta, munach katon. And then from last week, Darka Tevir Atma Ve'asla Munach Revi Gershayim Munach Legame Telisha Gedola Yativ, and that good old shout. And I don't think I explained last week, but these little gray arrows in between are just trying to show you that these are not coming as a family. Those are just 4 separate notes that are being up there. So you don't need to learn them in that pattern in particular. It's just how I decided to choose which ones to add for which week of study. Okay, today we are finishing up with the most common of the uncommon. Remember, week 1, the Nachta family, the Sof Pasuk family, and the Katon family, those are the most common of the common. And those will get you through 90% of most of the Megillah, 80% in some places, but it'll get you through an awful lot. And then last week were the common, uncommon, and now we're into the less common, uncommon ones. So I'm going in what's the right word? It says a descending order of frequency of how often you're going to need to use these. So that way, the ones you studied first will be the ones you need the most. And these will be the ones you'll come back to and practice occasionally, but you may not need to use too much unless you're reading a large portion of the Megillah. You might not do these at all on a given year. There are some chapters that use only one or two of the odd ones, and everything else is the regular stuff from week one. Okay, so our first one is the Segol family, and it goes Munach Zarka ha 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 Munach Segol. So let's do that again. Munach Zarka ha 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 Munach Segol. Now, Hazer stands alone, one of the least frequent ones in the entire trope system. And it goes like this. Well, I guess I should add this in. There are obviously fancier ways and simpler ways, and there are some varieties from different communities around the world and just around the country. So the version I'm doing is what was taught to me. I may have shaved off a few notes here and there to simplify it for my own vocal apparatus, because I am not an opera singer and I am not a cantor. But hopefully the version I have comes through clear enough. If you want somebody much sharper, I can point anyone interested with online resources that is more note perfect for the musical side of it. So Hazer in my version, you'll see why I made that disclaimer here, goes like this. Hazer. That's the version that I know and that I've been using. There are other more elaborate, other less elaborate versions, but let me do that one for you again. It's just a little floaty bit up at the top. Talisha Kitana is not very complicated. Talisha Kitana. Talisha Kitana, sort of a little bit more skippy than the regular version. Torah version is what I consider regular. And then Zakef Gadol is also not terribly different than the Torah one. Zakef Gadol, Zakef Gadol. And of course, all of these will vary a little bit more depending upon what word you're singing them on. And I do have a selection that we will look at a little bit later on to try and put more of this into practice. All right, so the Zarka family we just went over. Na Zarka, Monach Sego. Let's see how the combinations can play out. You know what? Let's move the mouse over here. And actually, let's move that out of the driver's seat. Okay, so that's the version we just did. Munach Zarka, Monach Sego.
How to get a trope between Zarka and Segol?
What's that?
Why is there bother to have a trope between Zarka and Segol?
You mean that Munach?
Yeah, it sounds like it's neutral anyway.
It is neutral. It is neutral in this configuration, and that is because there is a word there. And because of the way the phrase is structured, the grammar of the phrase, whenever you're using a Segol phrase, that word, should it appear, needs to have that neutral roll-through kind of melody. Because indeed, one of the most common varieties of this family is to have nothing in between them, to go straight from the Zarka to Segol. But if there's a word, it needs a trope. And so therefore they put on that neutral Munach trope. We know that it is a linker. We know that it is pulling you into the next word. And that fits the grammar of those phrases. But you're absolutely right. You can do it without that if you only have a 3-word phrase rather than the 4-word phrase. And if you have the 3-word phrase, it would sound like Munach Zarka Segol. And you could even do it without the intro. Zarka Munach Segol. And you can just do it with the 2 main events. Zarka Segol. And we could go through these, but I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we have time because we're going to look at some actual Megillah text for the conclusion tonight. So we'll come and we can do that some other time. Hazer, again, These are slightly less common. Pazer is very strange. Talisha Kitana, not strange at all, but it's still much less frequent than the first week's ones. Pazer, Pazer, and Tlisha Kitana, Tlisha Kitana. Okay, so if we want to strap them all together, we want to cram our minivan with a whole long phrase, and indeed these phrases absolutely do occur in the text, it would sound something like this. Munach hazer tlisha kitana kadma ve'azla munach revi. And that is a nice crammed fold van. But notice that it's not a collection of random notes. These are a particular pattern. When you have them coming like this, you're not going to have the kadma and the atzla interrupted by a pazer. It is most likely going to come at the beginning of that kind of phrase rather than at the end. Oh, I didn't even notice that I actually ended up putting revi out on the dash. But that's what happens when it's a truly full car. All right, and then, like we said before, Zakef Gadol, Zakef Gadol. It does generally just stand by itself. So not too hard. Once you've learned it, you've got it. All right. Now, when we get to the end of a chapter, we do what's called a sof aliyah. Now, it's basically just the sof pasuk, except with a little bit more of a flourish. So I just threw myself off. I said the word aliyah, my brain immediately went back into Torah version. Should have replaced it with the word chapter. Mercha tipha, mercha sof pasuk. Mercha tipha, mercha sof pasuk. That would be what you would say at the end of a chapter. Now, in our reading, we generally do excerpts from the chapter, so you're not always finishing the chapter, even though you are finishing your reading. That means that you would often not need to do this particular melody, because it's not, when we do our excerpt, they're not aliyot in the Torah sense of the word, they are mere excerpts as we duck back and forth between the Hebrew and English in order to make it as accessible and meaningful as possible. But should you get an end of a chapter, that's the melody you would use. Mercha tipha, mercha sof pasuk, or mercha tipha, sof pasuk, or tipha, mercha sof pasuk, and tipha, sof pasuk, and sof pasuk, which that doesn't actually occur in the Megillah. Okay. Momentum is important. Oh, sorry. Obviously, we've been hopefully, reminded of the whole some words join or some trope joins, some trope separates, that we need to have some words get connected, some words don't. But it also is for your own benefit to keep the momentum of a verse going. Let it flow from one word to the next. Now, it doesn't mean you override the stop and go signs that each trope is giving you, but it does mean that you don't let yourself get caught as doing it sort of one word, next word, next word. Even for words that are separate, the trope is melodically meant to pull you into the next phrase. And so trying to keep that momentum is to your own benefit. And like I say, it's like monkey bars or riding a bicycle. We're doing it one at a time, doing it one pedal, makes your life harder for yourself. Yes.
I was thinking about Merkah sounds a lot like Nunah in front of one of the words.
Mercha is a joiner, and it is a more neutral note, exactly. So munach, when it is going incognito, when it is just hiding out and not doing anything fancy on its own. Oftentimes we'll have a note that is the same note as the where you finished before. So like when we were doing the Segol phrasing, when you do that sort of filler munach, you're just holding the note through. Likewise, when you're doing the sof pasuk or sof aliyah or sof for perek, the chapter, the mercha that comes after the tipcha is just holding that note till the end until you get to the fancy bit. And that is a common trait for a lot of the joiner trope, to just move along, move along, move along, keep you through that that note. But it does, the note does vary depending upon what came before it, of what note did I finish on that I'm now holding until I get to the next inflection point. So good ear, absolutely correct, but they're not identical. But yes, they are very, very similar, but it depends on context. Oh, and okay. I always remind people there are different ways to learn. Some people learn just by listening. Others will learn with color. Color coding your chanting for the different families is something that I've seen many people have great success with. So, you know, they're Etnachta families, they'll just color all the same color so that they know I'm in Etnachta zone. So that means these are the melodies I need. Some people will only use color for certain highlight tropes that make it easier for them to follow. I personally hate color coding because my eyes don't register it well, but each person is different. I, on the other hand, am a happier guy with motion. I sometimes drive the bar mitzvah students crazy with, you know, my little hand twirls of how I think the melody is going. I can't read music. Well, I can read drum music, but that doesn't really do much for this. And the hand motions to me are a good substitute. So like you may have noticed with the for me, that feels very rocking back and forth. And so that ends up where I'm, you know, just sort of mentally now, but originally I would, you know, sort of conduct it like that. And each person can come up with their own, right? There is no wrong way to learn as long as it works. So with that in mind, I need to find another place. Need to consistently leave a block for Zoom. What's that?
And some of us are visual and like the musical notes.
And some people,
Western musical notation.
Western musical notation has a lot going for it. You know, that's as much as I love bragging about this being the oldest continuously used musical notation system still used in the world. I also recognize that this is not a very flexible musical notation, nor is it a very good reminder of the actual notes in each category. So if you can read music, again, let me know and I can send you resources that have note by note what each one of these can sound like. It just is meaningless to me, and I don't play an instrument that would be useful for me to do a demonstration with. So you're left with me doing it the way I got it. But yeah, what's that?
Oh, I'm pretending I'm hitting the keyboard. Plunk,
right,
plunk,
exactly.
Plunk, one key at a time.
And if you know how to read music, it is an incredibly useful resource. All right, so chapter 9, verse 25 to 26, we have a nice little section here. Wait, did I end it up? I think yes, I did. Okay. It's okay, we're good, but ignore the stuff at the bottom. That's the next slide. There's supposed to be 2 verses per slide, not 3. We will get to that verse, but it's on the next slide. So this one I liked because it's got a whole lot of everything. So we get to practice a big chunk of different trope. So we start off with our Segol family with the Zarka, and then we go into a Katon family, a short version, a Ger Shayim, Darga, Tavir, then into our nice regular Mercha, Tipcha, et Nachta, Mercha, Tavir, Mercha, Sof Pasuk. So we really get a nice wide range, and we're going to get even more other ones in our next verse. So what we're going to do is we're going to do each family as a block. We're not going to try and just read the whole thing sight read. So we're going to do each family as a block. I'll do it once, and then I'll do it twice. If you want to join in with me on number 2 or number 1, please feel free. And of course, if you're watching the recording, Do this however you like, because I'm not there to tell you any different. All right, so uv-o-a lifnei hamelech is our first phrase. Uv-o-a lifnei hamelech. Uv-o-a lifnei hamelech. Next phrase is our katon. Amar im hasefer. Amar im hasefer. See, I told you in the beginning that I always have trouble switching back and forth. Amar im hasefer. Amar im hasefer. One more time because it's short. Amar im hasefer. Yashuv is all by himself, at least for our version today. Yashuv, Yashuv. And sometimes you'll notice we shorten it if the word is shorter than the namesake of the trope. And then machashavto hara'a. Machashavto hara'a. Machashavto hara'a. Machashavto hara'a. And then we're going all the way to our etnachta. Asher sorry, I didn't read it first. Asher chashav al hayehudim al rosho. Asher chashav al hayehudim al rosho. Notice there's a lot of syllables in the middle there, so it sounds a little stilted. That's okay. Remember, the melody is secondary to the actual flow of words. Asher chashav al hayehudim al rosho. And then we're going to do our mercha tevir. Vitalu oto. Vitalu oto. Vitalu oto. Vitalu oto. And then we'll finish off our sof pasuk. Ve'et banav al ha'etz. Ve'et banav al ha'etz. Ve'et banav al ha'etz. Ve'et banav al ha'etz. All right, onward into verse 26, unless there were any questions for 25. Okay, so we're going to start off with the alkane kar'u. Alkane kar'u. We'll do the pazer, talisha, kitana back to back. Alkane kar'u. Alkane kar'u. Sometimes it is a little harder for me to sing too many notes on only one syllable. But
Try to move closer.
what's that? You're gonna try?
Try to move a little closer.
Little-
Read the letters, but not the tropes.
I see. We can always grab a copy of the Tanakh if you'd rather read it from a text at your seat. There's a tikkun on the top shelf next to you. You turn a bit to your right, up there, the blue one, but I don't actually know if that has Megillat Esther in it. Hold on, let's see if I can. Yeah, that's the very thin, tall blue one.
No, your hand was on it a second ago, there.
But I don't
Yeah,
know
it's
if it
in the back.
is in the back.
Yeah, it looks exactly like mine. That was the one that had 3 lines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is the most common version. Or, there's Esther. No, this one feels very fresh. Okay. Yeah. Okay, where are you gonna sit? Over there? Here, I'll come around. We just did that verse right there. Okay, so. All right, verse 26, we're picking up with our, all the way down here, our Zakef Katon family. Layamim ha'ele Purim, it's missing a dagesh, al Shem Hapur. Actually, I think Ele Purim, sorry, it should not have a dagesh, my mistake. So, layamim ha'ele urim al shem hapur. Now, why does it not have a dagesh? Because we are using a joiner into the next word, and it ends with an open vowel sound, which means the next word does not usually have a dagesh. It's the soft ending leads to the soft opening of the next word. It's why you often find like the word bait will sometimes lose a dagesh if it's right in front, if it is another word with an open vowel sound, as long as they're linked together. That's a whole nother conversation, but I'll be happy to answer questions about that another time. But right now we're in chanting mode. Okay. Ha'elefurim al shem hapur. I left out layamim. Sorry. Layamim ha'elefurim al shem hapur. Layamim ha'elefurim al shem hapur. The next one, Al-Kain, is another standalone. Key completely there. Al-Kain. Then we're moving into our Etnachta family. Al-Kol Divrei. Didn't read again. Al-Kol Divrei ha'igeret hazot. Right? This letter, ha'igeret hazot. You'll notice that some people even have a tradition of gripping the text of the Megillah more forcefully, perhaps lifting it up in order to emphasize zot, this one. Al kol divrei ha'igeret hazot. Al kol divrei ha'igeret hazot. We come into another katon family. Uma ra'u al kacha. Uma ra'u al kacha. Uma ra'u al kacha. Uma ra'u al kacha. And then our sof pasuk comes along. Uma higia alehem. Uma higia alehem. Uma higia alehem. Uma higia alehem. All right, moving on. I think we got time for at least one more verse because I really want to point out something for those of you that are new to chanting from a non-haftarah, at least not from a haftarah scroll. You may notice the whole bracket parentheses up there. And this is the way this particular text that I was using sets out what's known as kativ and kri. Kativ and kri means that there is a way that the word is written that is different than the way that the word is pronounced. We should be used to that in English, but in Hebrew, it doesn't always happen. It rarely happens. And sometimes the word can look substantially different. For example, here, the word would be written like that, but it would be pronounced like that. And you can notice immediately that the final vowel is missing from the written version, which means you've got to bring that with you mentally. Happens in the Torah quite often, happens in other texts to varying degrees, depending upon the text. So that is something to keep your eyes open for in order to make sure that you're going to say the right word, even as your eyes give you different information when you're looking at the scroll. So when you're practicing at home, make sure that you're always getting the right pronunciation for the word that is going to appear. And different tikkunim, the books that we use to prepare, will do that differently. Some of them just don't tell you that it's happening. And you've got one version in the no vowels, and you've got one version with the vowels, and you're the reader, you have to figure that out. Most of them nowadays will highlight it in some way. They'll put it in a different color, they'll put it in brackets, they'll do something to let you know to be more careful on this point. So let's just do a little bit of this. We've got 5 minutes. Yeah, let's see how far we can get. So we're going to do the first 3 words. And remember, we're only doing one of these, and we're going to pronounce it like that guy. Himu vekiblu hayehudim. Himu vekiblu hayehudim. You'll notice it doesn't come through very clearly in this printout of whether or not that's the shvav you hear or not. But one clue that you're going to hear it is the dagesh in the yud means that the yud is kind of phonetically double strength, and that means that it is not just finishing off the high side, but it's also beginning the word yehu, yeh, and so you're going to hear that yeah there. So that's why it's high yehudim, not high hudim. We got to hear that yeh sound in there, accentuated because of that dagesh, that little dot in the yud. So the dot doesn't change a lot of words or a lot of letters pronunciations. Usually it's just a few core words that actually get changed by the sound in them. But occasionally it will change the vowel, the vocalization of the shva. And so keeping your eyes open for it can be helpful. So we're going to go from Hayehudim, Alehem, Al Zar'am. Hayehudim, Alehem, Ve'al Zar'am, which you may notice is part of the section that we read earlier. Hayehudim, Alehem, Ve'al Zar'am. Hayehudim, Alehem, Ve'al Zar'am. And then we continue now back into a nice long katon phrase, finishing up here, starting off with Ve'al, Kol ha-nilvim, Alehem, Ve'lo ya'avor. Ve'al, Kol ha-nilvim, Alehem, Ve'lo ya'avor. Ve'al, Kol ha-nilvim, Alehem, Ve'lo ya'avor. Ve'al kol hanilvim alehem ve'lo ya'avor. Revi'i phrase finishing with the word osim. Liot osim. Liot osim. Liot osim. Then we're pulling into our next katon family, and we get an example of a floating munach. These sometimes do come just sort of haphazardly. There are grammar reasons, of course, but usually they are just sung neutrally. Some different trope systems will give them a little more flavor. I tend to just use them as a neutral pause as we move through the text. So we'll use him as our intro. Eight shnei hayamim ha'ele. Et shnei hayamim ha'ele. Et shnei hayamim ha'ele. Et shnei hayamim ha'ele. And onward to Sof Pasuk. Kichtavam. Oh, sorry. I missed out the etnachta there. I need better glasses too. So we're going to pick up on the etnachta. Kichtavam v'chizmanam. Kichtavam v'chizmanam. Kichtavam v'chizmanam. Kichtavam v'chizmanam. And now we're at Sof Pasuk, and we're just on time. Bechol shana v'shana. Bechol shana v'shana. Bechol shana v'shana. Bechol shana v'shana. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. So that is going to do it for tonight. We'll just do a little finish up of some loose ends, odds and ends next week. But that will be our final time. But again, as I said at the beginning, I'm happy to meet personally, phone, Zoom, in person, to go over anything that someone would like. And I know sometimes it's just a lot easier one-on-one. So just let me know and we'll make it happen. Take care, everyone. And oh, yes.
Question on the.
Well, let me just finish the Zoom and all of that, and then I'll come back. I'm not going to delete the screen, but I do want to stop the